because I speak to you about the school-to-prison pipeline, not merely as a theoretical principle that I have studied. This is my life, up close and personal, and it could never be captured in a PowerPoint. My name is Vivett, and I am deeply in love with and married to a man behind bars who made mistakes in his life that could have been prevented if his schools sought to educate him as much as they sought to suspend him. According to the American Civil Liberties Union of New York, a child who has been suspended is more likely to fall behind in school, be retained a grade, drop out of high school, commit a crime, and become incarcerated as an adult. All of these, with the exception of one, ring true for my husband, John. Additionally, the best demographic indicators of children who will be suspended are not the type or severity of the crime, but the color of their skin, the school they go to, and whether they have been suspended before. That's not all. Black and brown students represented only 17% of national public school enrollment in 2000, but accounted for 34% of the suspensions. They accounted for half of the enrollment, yet double the amount of suspensions. Special education students represent 8.6% of public school students, but 32% of youth in juvenile detentions nationwide. That's over 5 times the likelihood of being in a juvenile detention center if you are tracked as a special education student. This also is true for my husband, John. Black students with learning disabilities are 3 times more likely to be suspended than white students with learning disabilities, and 4 times more likely to end up in correctional facilities. The failures of the education system are feeding the broken justice system. This is nothing to be taken lightly. And we hear stats day in and day out in our line of work about what's wrong. But as I look out into the sea of faces, I ask each of you, what are we going to do to help make it right? Acknowledging it's wrong is no longer enough. It never was. I enjoy gardening almost as much as I enjoy teaching. There's something very therapeutic about digging into the earth and planting something and nurturing it and watching it grow. The child is like a precious plant. If we give it enough water and sunlight, i.e. love and education, and shelter it from the harshness of life by pulling out the weeds that want to attack it and stunt its growth. That's where we come in, the caring adults in a child's life, which for so many of our children, we are all they have. We're it. If these things happen to this plant, this child, it can grow to be strong and bear fruit and thrive and become a contributing member to our society. I don't think any of us got into education for anything other than that. To help others self-actualize, to see their worth, to become those things that they perhaps never saw in themselves, but a teacher like you and I saw it in them and brought it out in them. But how can that happen when students are being brought into prisons instead of into classrooms, instead of into therapy sessions, instead of into true reflection reflection of themselves so they can deal with whatever the myriad of issues are that they are experiencing. Recently, my husband John sent me a letter, and I would like to share it with you in closing. In this letter from my husband John, he thoughtfully reflects upon his 7th grade year in school, a year that by his own admission was a life-changing one. It's funny because I just so happen to teach 7th grade English language arts this year, so I'm able to draw so many parallels between not only how he describes himself at that age, and come to think of it, I knew him since that age. And I think about him and my students now, and I wonder, do I have any Johns in my classroom this year? Students who look the part socially, but are existing under the radar academically? Am I connecting with my students beyond just imagery and text evidence? And citing a strong claim? You're laughing because you know what I'm talking about. And if they didn't feel like they belonged, am I a teacher that they would feel safe going to express their concerns beyond what they got in their last ELA state exam? The more John shares with me about his reflections on his journey from school to prison, is the more sensitive and aware I become in my own teaching practice, and I implore you to do the same. I see a direct correlation between the peer and teacher experiences of students, particularly Black and brown male students, and the way they are disproportionately represented in the school to prison pipeline. Those stats that I read to you are not things that I made up and pulled out of the air. There's a preponderance of evidence that speaks to this phenomenon, this very horrible reflection on our society and who we have become as a people, as Americans. Our young Black and brown boys need so much love, and they are so often misunderstood. Their high creative energy is often misconstrued and as insubordination, and this leads to extremely high rates of disciplinary actions like suspensions, which you know the rest. As I willingly take this hindsight excursion with my husband, and I invite you along on that journey, I can't help but ask myself, if one piece of his academic puzzle had been different in this critical 7th grade year, would he be writing me from prison today? And he writes, Dear Vivett, the year 1986 was a major one for me. I was in 7th grade, and I was the cool kid. Older children knew my name. I dressed like them, spoke like them, and hung out with them. My appearance dictated my life, and while the older kids provided a plethora of haphazard information, they were just as clueless as I was about life. However, my popularity started to stagnate my academic growth. I protected my status by staying in quote-unquote familiar waters, fashion, slang, parties, dancing, drinking, popular company. I began to feel like a king amongst men. Nevertheless, the 7th grade blur caught up with me. In fact, 7th grade prepared me for other difficult moments that I would cause myself in life later on. Somehow, oddly enough, my teachers never bothered to positively address my negative behavior. I was really under the radar. Finally, my mother was called by the school. The caller said these words while I was busy seeking sympathy for being in the predicament I was in. Mrs. Dukes, there's no need to allow John to come back this year. He's going to repeat 7th grade due to his disciplinary record. My surprises were only beginning after that school phone call. The school decided to place me in special ed classes. They kicked me out and sent me to another school in the district. In special ed, the teachers were more engaging, I admit, and I enjoyed the positive attention that they gave me. Shout out to all the special ed teachers out there. One teacher took notice of my capability. He started to take an interest in me and encouraged me to get back in my right grade. Shout out to all the male teachers out there. I was in a new school, meeting new people, but was still indulging in the same behaviors. I kept asking myself, what's wrong with me? I needed help, and fast. Love always, John. We have an arduous task before us, educators. Don't need to say this to you. If you teach brown or black children, if you see that they are singled out, if you see any injustice, our role as teachers is not merely to teach. We are social activists. If you've never looked at yourself in that role before, I'm here to tell you that's who we are and what we do. I don't think any of us are doing this profession for the money. I know I'm not. That alone would not keep us. Definitely not that, exactly. We're doing this because somewhere in our lives, a teacher took an interest in us. Take an interest in those who feel like they don't belong. Open your eyes, wake up. Start to right some of these wrongs. Because if we don't do it, who else will? And if this doesn't happen now, when will it? When will we start to be the change we want to see in the world? I leave you with that question, and I invite you to really dig deep during this session, to really tap into who it is you are, what your passion is in education, and work it. Work it like your life depends on it. Because not only does your